Hello, my name is Nigel Thorne, and I'm concerned the Welsh Government is using relationships and sexuality education to create political activists. In a book titled Schools as Queer Transformative Spaces, in a chapter titled Rebel Becomings, Queering School Spaces with Young People, academic Leanne Cole writes, "It is impossible to ignore the increasing role that queer and feminist activism is playing in schools. Programmes and resources such as Stepping Out Against Gender-Based Violence and Fight Back in Australia and Agenda Wales are some international examples of how explicit, post-structural, queer and feminist new materialist frameworks are being used in schools to queer school spaces and educational experiences. A burgeoning empirical research focused on queer straight alliances and feminist collectives in schools also emphasises the strikingly diverse ways young people think and practice activism in different locations and from different cultural and social perspectives. This work highlights the significance of student-led initiatives in destabilising hetero and cisgender normativity. The explicit aim of the Agenda resource pushed into Welsh schools is to encourage students to become rebellious and to actively destabilise hetero and cisgender normativity. Professor Reynolds states,
"A lot of this work has involved designing and drawing upon creative methods for children and young people to safely communicate the issues that matter to them, and then to ensure that their views are heard and shared and acted upon. And one of the moments I've been most proud of was to distill this creative praxis into the Agenda resource and website. So this little film you see behind me captures one of the case studies in the resource of children writing on rulers and ribbons and kites what they want to change to make gender equality and justice matter and fly. And over the last 3 years, we've been sharing this creative praxis in an innovative professional learning programme for teachers in Wales who are preparing for the new statutory relationships and sexuality education curriculum, a curriculum which I continue to have the privilege to inform and shape. And it's a resource and a creative and ethical praxis that's having a significant international reach in the field of RSE, from Finland to Australia. But it started and it has become embedded here in Wales."
A page on LGBTQ Primary Hub gives more information. What is heteronormativity and cisnormativity? Heteronormativity, a discourse based on the assumption that heterosexuality is the norm and privileges this over any other form of sexual orientation. But heterosexuality is the norm. Humanity would not exist without sexual intercourse between a man and a woman. This does not mean that we should be prejudiced against those who are same-sex attracted. Indeed, the Equality Act does protect people from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Cisnormativity, a discourse based on assumption that cisgender is the norm and privileges this over any other form of gender identity. Again, it is normal not to believe that you have been born in the wrong body. And again, the Equality Act does protect people from discrimination on the basis of gender reassignment. The purpose of queer theory is, as promoted on a video by Professor Reynolds, available on the Brook Learn website, the purpose of queer theory is to normalise everything. Many people believe that children's mental health would be better if everything wasn't normalised. The chapter Rebel Becomings continues. Of particular importance is the extensive research of Professor Emma Reynolds, focused on the affordances of co-productive, creative and effective methodologies to engage social and political change with young people around gender sexualities issues that matter. The recent co-production of the creative activist resource for young people and practitioners, Agenda, is one example of how Reynolds has engaged with feminist, queer, qualitative research activisms with young people to inform policy and practice. Reynolds is engaging with young people to attempt to get them to make political change, to destabilise social norms. The chapter continues. Agenda is a unique anti-guide that resists any definitive statements on what constitutes a healthy relationship, but instead allows for the creation of artful encounters that make space for young people to learn about gender-based and sexual violence in relationships through the rule-bending and rule-breaking practices of others. Inspired by the sophisticated body of scholarship which focuses on what else research and education related to gender sexualities might do or become, this chapter will explore the affordances of student-led feminist collectives in querying school spaces. This chapter argues that repositioning young people as active agents in problematizing, rupturing and destabilizing hetero and cisgender normativity. It is worth repeating, the explicit aim of Professor Reynolds' work is to create student activists, to destabilise social norms. What is being pushed into Welsh schools is queer pedagogy. In the Oxford Research Encyclopedia, queer pedagogy is defined as an approach to educational praxis and curricula emerging in the late 20th century, drawing from the theoretical traditions of post-structuralism, queer theory and critical pedagogy. The ideas put forth by key figures in queer theory, including principally Michel Foucault and Judith Butler, were adopted in the early 1990s to posit an approach to education that seeks to challenge heteronormative structures and assumptions in K-12 and higher education curricula, pedagogy and policy. Queer pedagogy, much like the queer theory that informs it, draws on the lived experience of the queer, wonky or non-normative as a lens through which to consider educational phenomena. Queer pedagogy seeks to both uncover and disrupt hidden curricula of heteronormativity, as well as to develop classroom landscapes and experiences that create safety for queer participants. On a Substack page called Re-Education, there is a post titled Welcome to Hell, I mean Queer Pedagogy, from Paulo Freire's Twisted Mind to the Rainbow Coalition in your kids' classroom. The author writes, if you've read some of my previous posts, you'll be all too familiar with Paulo Freire. For those of you who are new, Freire is simultaneously a communist nutjob and the most influential educator of all time, whose ideas have been taught at almost every university in the West. A link takes you to an essay on Paulo Freire. Freire was a huge fan of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. In the Cultural Revolution, Mao indoctrinated children and students through schools and universities using identity politics and by pressuring children to denounce their family and adopt their new identity category as their new family. Freire saw this as a blueprint to establish a cultural revolution in the West. His entire educational thesis can be summarized as indoctrinate the teachers to indoctrinate the children. This program is well underway, I'm sad to report. Freire's most famous work is Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In the book, Freire calls traditional pedagogy the banking model of education because it treats the student as an empty vessel to be filled with knowledge, like a piggy bank. He argues that pedagogy should instead treat the learner as a co-creator of knowledge. Freire writes, the pedagogy of the oppressed as a humanist and libertarian pedagogy has two distinct stages. In the first, the oppressed unveil the world of oppression and through the praxis commit themselves to its transformation. In the second stage, in which the reality of oppression has already been transformed, this pedagogy ceases to belong to the oppressed and becomes a pedagogy of all people in the process of permanent liberation. In both stages, it is always through action in depth that the culture of domination is culturally confronted. A footnote explains. This appears to be the fundamental aspect of Mao's cultural revolution. As of 2000, the book had sold over 750,000 copies worldwide. It is the third most cited book in the social sciences. In Wikipedia, queer pedagogy is defined as an academic discipline devoted to exploring the intersection between queer theory and critical pedagogy, which are both grounded in Marxist critical theory. Queer pedagogy explores and interrogates the student-teacher relationship, the role of identities in the classroom, the role of eroticism in the teaching process, the nature of disciplines and curriculum, and the connection between the classroom and the broader community, with a goal of being both a set of theoretical tools for pedagogical critique of pedagogy, and or a set of practical tools for those doing pedagogical work. Reynolds writes about queering childhood by dissolving the binary oppositions between male and female and adult and child. Professor Reynolds tells teachers that children have a right to a gender identity and encourages children to explore their gender. Professor Reynolds has recently come out as non-binary. They is quick to highlight how young people's misunderstanding of gender, driven by queer theory and picked up on social media, is influencing teachers. This is using Paulo Freire's argument that pedagogy should treat the learner as the co-creator of knowledge. In this way, an ideology can spread. Although her creation agenda is no longer available on Hub, many of its activities are used by Spectrum. Dr. Esther McGeaney is a co-creator of the RSE materials for Welsh schools. She has been inspired by French philosopher Michel Foucault. She encourages teachers to teach children about sexual pleasure and to run activities with children exploring pleasurable touch. In a paper she wrote for her doctorate extolling the virtues of a sex-positive education, McGeaney discusses a paper written by Allen and Carmody. She writes, in this way, their paper raises, rather than addresses, a number of difficult and productive questions about how to operationalize the queer concept of pleasure as a site of possibility within the regulatory practices of schooling, and how to reconcile the concept with feminist investments in ideas around female safety, empowerment, and the experience of mutual or shared pleasure. What might be the risks of giving up on potentially regulatory feminist discourses of desire that imagine heterosexual pleasure in terms of mutuality and equality? In what ways might it be possible for educators to create these kinds of disruptive and queer spaces without them being unintentionally regulated or shaped by the educators or the institution's moral values and political investments? Again, McGeaney sees teaching children about sexual pleasure as a disruptive force, a force that helps to dissolve the binary opposition between adult and child. She concludes her paper by stating her aim of developing an accessible document that provides the rationale and evidence for conducting this work that can be made publicly available for use by practitioners and organisations needing support in dealing with conservative parents and enraged school governors. In conducting this work in collaboration with Brooke, I hope to draw on and contribute to their campaign around challenging society's negative attitudes to sex and promoting a sex-positive culture. In October 2022, the Safe Schools Alliance published a review of the relationships and sexuality education curriculum in Wales. The author writes about sex positivity. Sex positivity is a social political movement that aims to bring about social and cultural change in relation to sexuality. While it recognises the importance of safe sex, for example, protecting against sexually transmitted infections, it otherwise absolves itself of all moral considerations in relation to sexual activity, notwithstanding consent. Esther McGeaney was the co-author of a book with Alice Hoyle titled Great Relationships and Sex Education, 200 plus activities for working with young people. In a further publication from the Safe Schools Alliance, the author writes, Great Relationships and Sex Education is a resource used in schools across the UK and was co-authored by former Sex Education Forum founding trustee and long-standing advisor Alice Hoyle. On page 215, an activity is presented based on Gail Rubin's concept of the charmed circle. It requires children to question what sexual activities may be considered good and bad. Gail Rubin's paper, Thinking Sex, proposes that it is an erotic injustice that some activities, including sexual relationships with children, are prohibited. Rubin argues that activism is required to overcome this, now known as sex positivism, to ensure a radical reimagining of sex in society. These ideas, which advocate for illegal and abusive sexual behaviours, now inspire children's educational resources, as well as sexuality education standards and frameworks worldwide. In the UK, the legal age of consent is 16. This activity is intended for 14-year-olds. The goal of queer theory is to normalise everything. In a queer theory paedophilia jeopardy exercise for students, Derek Jensen talks about Gail Rubin.
The author of the founding document of queer theory.
Who is Gail Rubin?
Who is Gail Rubin? What percentage? No, the answer is 50%. Question is?
The amount in that article that was a defense of pedophilia, specifically, quote, boy lovers, so men with tough boys.
Oh. And since you're not believing me, quote, this is in the founding document of queer theory. Like communists and homosexuals in the 1950s, boy lovers are so stigmatized that it is difficult to find defenders of their civil liberties, let alone for their erotic orientation. That's in the founding document of queer theory. I'm sorry, I'm using facts. A thousand apologies. One must never let facts in the way. Oh, and she also compared, by the way, she compared pedophilia to a preference for spicy food. The thing is, I have never heard of anyone who has to have years of therapy because they ate hot and sour soup.
The author of Re-Education believes that queer pedagogy is similar to the tools used during the Cultural Revolution in China, and it deliberately drives a wedge between parents and children. He writes, if you've ever read about cult indoctrination, isolating the indoctrination target from their family connections is a key step. And notice the similarity with Mao. Getting a new family through your identity group, away from your real family.
If you need a new family, if you need a family that respects your deepest truth, that listens to you, that celebrates you, that doesn't mercilessly make fun of you as the glue that holds the family together, you're welcome here, in this family, on this page. We will love you unconditionally. I'm glad you're here.
I could spend the rest of the week showing examples of this kind of thing in schools. Some classrooms are almost entirely filled with gender identity posters and other political iconography. It's a wonder they have time for the actual lessons. So how much of this is hyperbole? Well, Mao indoctrinated children and students through schools and universities using identity politics and by pressuring children to denounce their family and adopt their new identity category as their new family. Queer pedagogy is of a similar nature. It is born from a fusion of critical pedagogy, exemplified in Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where the oppressed unveil the world of oppression and through the praxis commit themselves to its transformation. And queer theory, where binary oppositions are regarded as inherently hierarchical, where one pole of the binary oppresses the other. So what is being taught? Well, not acceptance of people who are trans, which will be fine, but teaching the novel idea as facts that people have a gender identity. This is being done for a political purpose. A gender identity is required to dissolve the binary opposition between male and female. Children will not be taught that sex is biological and that gender is a social construct, as a previous generation was taught. Instead, following the writings of Judith Butler, children will be taught that gender is an identity and that sex is something that is attributed to them. From the age of 3, children will be taught that people have an internal gender. And from the age of 7, children will be taught that people also have an external sex. Sex positivity, where there are no moral considerations in relation to sexual activity other than it is safe and consensual. From the age of 11, children will be taught about sexual pleasure and could very well be introduced to a smorgasbord of different sexual practices. This will queer the binary opposition between adult and child. Inclusivity of different gender identities. Now, this will queer the manufactured opposition between cis and trans, and rather than being regarded as a mental health issue, gender dysphoria will be regarded as an issue of civil rights. This education, it is said, is a child's right, and parents have no rights to exclude their child from this teaching.
Children's rights to RSE is also now protected by ending the parental right to withdraw. So parents will no longer be able to withdraw their children from RSE, which means that all children will now have the right to participate in this new, holistic, developmentally appropriate RSE.
In no other part of the curriculum do we allow parents to withdraw young people from education that is evidence-based, education that is facts-based, and education that we have proven that they have a right to access through things like the Covenant on Children's Rights from the UN.
I believe RSE is a child's right, which is why I'm so pleased that the Senedd enshrined that right in law through the Curriculum and Assessment Wales Bill that we passed shortly before the Senedd elections. Empowering children and giving them agency in their lives is crucial for their well-being. RSE really is children's rights in action.
The cross-cutting themes for designing your curriculum page makes a number of references to children's rights and refers to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. However, nowhere is there any reference to Article 5 of the Convention, which states, "States parties shall respect the responsibilities, rights and duties of parents or, where applicable, the members of the extended family or community as provided for by local custom, legal guardians or other persons legally responsible for the child, to provide in a manner consistent with the evolving capacities of the child appropriate direction and guidance in the exercise by the child of the rights recognised in the present convention." So how is this teaching being promulgated? Well, queer theorists are indoctrinating teachers who in turn will be indoctrinating pupils. Leanne Cole, along with Esther McGeaney and DJ Reynolds, ran a conference for teachers in Wales on the 24th of June 2021. Alice Hoyle was a guest speaker. Reynolds and McGeaney train teachers in the Central South Consortium, covering the local authority areas of Bridgend, Merthyr, Rhondda Taff, Vale of Glamorgan and Cardiff. And although the agenda resource is no longer on Hub, the same ideas are being pushed by many external training organisations, including Brooke Cymru, who have been contracted to deliver teacher training to teachers in the Central South Consortium. The head of Brooke Cymru in Wales also works with the Children's Commissioner and the Welsh Government and has been highly influenced by Professor Reynolds. In line with Paulo Freire's teaching, children are being taught to indoctrinate each other, as well as teachers.
I suppose stuff that's not normalised, so stuff we don't have enough information on, I'd maybe be embarrassed talking about because I wouldn't go and get something wrong. But that's what we're hoping to do by bringing it cross-curricular, is normalising it so that people don't feel embarrassed like talking about bisexuality, gay, transgender, because it just makes it normal and comfortable then.
You see things in the social media like people coming out as like bisexual or transgender or like gender fluid, and you're not then told in school how to address those people or like what to do. So yeah, it's better than it was like 20 years ago, but it's still not enough. So that's why like putting sex ed over like cross curriculum and like teaching students like it's okay to come out as like bi or gay and that you don't need to put yourself in these boxes will be like really beneficial for the future.
The purpose of queer theory is, as promoted on a video by Professor Reynolds, to normalise everything. In the name of inclusivity, the Welsh Government are supporting queer pedagogy and the queering of childhood. They are encouraging the creation of a generation of gender activists. And Mark Drakeford is leading the charge.
When we said in 2021 that we wanted to make Wales the most LGBTQ+ friendly place in Europe, that is what we meant. And the action plan that our Welsh Labour government published earlier this year is a powerful statement of our determination to secure the open and equal Wales that we all want to see. Our ambition is to use every lever we have available to guarantee that stigma and discrimination have no place in Wales, by strengthening human rights, by banning conversion therapy, by removing the barriers which prevent LGBTQ+ people from being able to live freely and without abuse. That plan is being implemented right now. It reflects the enormous effort which has got our nation to this point. And I want to pay tribute to every person who has been part of that journey to today. From the pioneers of LGBTQ+ liberation to the thousands of nameless women, men, trans and non-binary people, all those who have taken up the struggle for equality in 1,000 forgotten ways. Because that struggle has been a long one, and we know that it is not yet over.
Just some space, I don't want any holes near the officers' backs. Police protect the fascists! Protect the fascists! Police protect the fascists! Our streets! Our streets! Our streets! Our streets! I'm still interested in the future of that.
Yeah.
Those parents who do not believe that a cultural revolution in Wales is a good thing may wish to support Public Child Protection Wales. Links are included below.